Well, we are so lucky to have one of these great minds from student education with us. Melissa Matarazzo is joining us. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to our little corner of paradise.
Sure. Well, I had the great benefit of working with the student education team when I was an executive director in Charleston, South Carolina in the Charleston County School District. And I left that district to pursue completing my doctoral dissertation, and at the time was able to work with the student education team and study the experience of leaders in 3 of the districts that they work with. Throughout that process, I learned ever more about the implementation support and the coaching that student education offers, and so when they offered me a position full-time at my graduation, I was happy to take it.
And you are not just book smart, you were a teacher, a classroom teacher yourself.
Yeah, I started my career in New Hampshire. I was an 8th grade social studies teacher.
God bless the middle school teachers of the world.
Well, and I stuck around in middle school for a long time. I went to assistant principal and then the principal of a 1,500 student middle school in Massachusetts before my travels to Charleston, South Carolina, and working at the district level with a district of 45,000 students.
You know, that's interesting if I can bring that up, because sometimes we find, whether it be healthcare education, I call it terminal uniqueness. People come up with the reason why it won't work. They always have a reason. When I first came to Pensacola, we had a high employee turnover. They said it's a Navy town, people move in and out, yet we solved that issue. You talk about size. You know, people say, well, the district's too large, but that's one of the interesting things is Escambia County School District and Charleston are pretty much about the same size, I believe. And I know you studied different districts, and I think economically, how much, there's some similarities there too, aren't there?
I think so. I think Escambia and Charleston both have a broad range of economics for different families in the community. Similar in size, similar racial diversity, economic diversity. So I do think they have some similarities. And it is amazing, having worked in small districts to large districts, urban, rural, suburban, that in my experience, there's more similar than there is different.
So what are, you obviously have classroom experience and then your training experience. What are some of the things that you took from the classroom that you, that are helping you in your endeavor now? Like what lesson did you take? What lesson did you take from being in the classroom?
Well, I hope I took some. So one of the things I think about most powerfully is the bar you mentioned earlier is rising, and it's rising for all students, not just some students, but we expect and we indeed kids deserve to achieve at the highest levels. And so from my time as a teacher, I remember how different every student was in my classroom. And so the key, I think, across our field is to get consistency around the individualization of education and the differentiation. So we have a bar, it's for everyone, and it should be ambitious, but we have to understand that every student and every school and every district may have some different means to get there. I think it's real important that we be looking at students as individuals and meeting them where they are.
We have, as I'm sure you're aware, we have a high school graduation rate that differs for our African American students than it is for our white students. The overall graduation rate in the county is 64%, but for white students it's 71%, and for black students it's about 51%. That disparity, if you look at the data, also that gap has pretty much existed in about the same height for several years. What kind of success did you all have in Charleston in trying to address some of those related issues? I
think, many districts across the country struggle with achievement gaps, whether they be racial or economic, but different groups of students achieving at different rates. And I think the key there is student engagement, that in many cases we've set up our schools to work really well for certain types of kids, and we haven't taken the time or the energy to make sure that what's going on in the classroom is relevant and meaningful to all of the students there. And it requires a lot of open awareness of how different the experiences our students are having than we did when we were in school, and saying what will have meaning for them that will keep them committed to this all the way through high school graduation. And I think where schools are showing that level of caring, and where leaders and teachers make sure that every student knows they belong and this is the place for them, then you tend to see more success.
Give us an example, because I mean, every teacher watching this show wants to engage students.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, in your travels across the country, your dissertation, tell me specifically where you saw a technique or a school district where it worked?
So it makes me think of the school district of Menominee Falls, which is a place we work with in Wisconsin, not as large as Escambia or Charleston,
Right.
but the work they're doing could be replicated in any place. And in that district, every teacher is setting short cycle goals with their students based off what they need to know by the end of the year. They take that end of the year target and they break the year down. And every couple of weeks, those teachers and students, after studying, they assess the students' progress. They say who's met it, who hasn't, and then they have to get creative, because if you haven't met it in the traditional curriculum approach, it's really on the teacher and on the teacher's team to figure out what else will work. It's not a matter of working harder, because all of our teachers are working diligently, and they're some of the hardest working people I know. It's about using that data really carefully to try to pinpoint what a student needs for the next period of time, and they're doing a great job of it there.
And the flexibility to do it. You know, when I was a teacher, of course, I taught special needs students, but for example, if a student was really interested in cars, we would try to make his reading would be about cars, his math would be about cars. If somebody was interested in, clothing, then once again, our reading would be about clothing, our math would be about clothing. I always use the word, years ago, 1/3 of every man was a 42 regular. So if I was a tailor, somebody'd come in, I'd guess at 1 out of 3 are 42 regular, but our children don't fit like that. And I think it's the ability to use flexible methods, as you said, to get to where the child is, to sort of engage them with their passion.
You make me think of Burke High School, which is in Charleston, South Carolina, predominantly African-American students and many of very low-income backgrounds. They partnered with, if you aren't aware, Charleston, South Carolina has a great restaurant town. And so their culinary arts department was paired with one of the top chefs in that area, and they ended up making it pretty far in Michelle Obama's competition for a new recipe, a healthy recipe. And it galvanized a lot of the community around the soup that they were making. And there you had students engaged in something the town is well known for, but it really piqued their interest and was where they wanted to study.
And drawing on from that thread, I think the community involvement in some schools here is something that we have a struggle with, that we know how to reach a certain kind of parent, a certain group of parents, but it seems like it can be difficult to open the door for other people whose demands on their time are different. What are some strategies that you've seen that help deal with that?
That's a great question, and I think it is one every school district and lots of families are concerned about, making sure that relationship is strong. I think you got to flood the airwaves, the communication channels. You can't assume that a paper and a backpack makes it home. You got to use the internet. You got to be tweeting and Facebooking and messaging, text messaging. Our families communicate in so many different ways now. We have to be in every one of those channels. I think the other thing is you got to ask parents, what's going well here and what can we do better? And any moment that you have them, you've got to ask that question and then be willing to hear their response.
I think as we wrap up here, I think the other thing is to be willing to try different methods. For example, I was reading about in Oklahoma, they have where they actually believe, don't assume the parents, or if the child's living with grandparents, that they know what to do. They actually have volunteers that go into the home and they actually sit down with the parents or wherever that child is living and explain to them why that child needs to be read to, and they teach them and show them how to do it. So I think, again, no matter where a child lives, whether it's a foster home, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, or a parent, they want to do a good job, but sometimes you just don't know. So they actually go in and they teach the families, here's some things you can do at home that'll work with this child.
I think that's really important because, school certainly has changed a lot since we were all there. And, sometimes I'm confused. I am confused by homework that Common Core sends home for my rising third grader. I have access to certain tools and the wherewithal to find out the answer to that question, but some of those tools that I have are not available to other parents.
Right. Well, and as we wrap, we all talk about economic development, and with the Studer Institute, we've been studying wages and jobs and improving the quality of life. And even though it's a long-term strategy, it all comes down to education. It all comes down to improving the kids staying in school. But then importantly, if we've seen recently with the study by the Chamber and that, we have to get kids job ready. And when I've talked to places, whether you're an employer looking to hire or a new company coming in, you want that that student that is ready. It doesn't always mean a college degree. It can be training in many of the trades. And I think the school districts really worked hard on a lot of their career academies too, which is, you know, it's certainly not lack of effort on our school district's part.
No, and I think that's important to note. Melissa, thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
being
Shannon.
with us.
Thank
Welcome
you.
to
Appreciate it.
Pensacola.
Yeah.
We're
Thanks
glad-
very much. I'm
glad
very
you
happy to
moved
be
here.